What's up YouTube? Welcome back to another episode of the Boss Recap, where we rate boss battles in our favorite video games. I'm your host DMLX, and today we'll be protecting the snowy streets of Harlem in Marvel's Spider-Man, Miles Morales. Released on November 12, 2020, launched alongside Sony's latest gaming router, the PS5, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales is a standalone expansion to the 2018 hit Marvel's Spider-Man, once again developed by Insomniac. Similar to games like Infamous Last Light and Uncharted Lost Legacy, Miles Morales takes elements from the base game of Marvel's Spider-Man and expands upon what was already established, which includes an original extensive story set a year after the events of the first game, where players take part in a coming-of-age story of Miles Morales becoming the new Spider-Man, discovering new powers and using gadgets that set him apart from his mentor Peter Parker, all the while trying to stop a war for control of the city that has broken out between the shady energy corporation Roxxon and the millennial cyberpunk gang known as the Underground. Ever since the introduction of Miles Morales back in 2011, debuting in Ultimate Fallout No. 4, his notoriety continues to grow rapidly with each new iteration of the character, whether it be Miles' appearances in the comics, games, animated shows, or film. Furthermore, Insomniac delivers on Miles' first solo outing in a gaming format, providing a narrative equally as compelling as Insomniac's first Spider-Man game, as well as reintroducing gameplay mechanics from its predecessor, Tinker, to complement Miles' fighting style, new abilities, and traversal prowess through the city. Plus, even though Miles Morales uses the same map from the first game, Insomniac found a way to make New York City feel different with new and vibrant additions to the open world, such as setting the game during the Christmas holiday season, and the various side activities to complete that delve deeper into Miles' growth into being a better friendly neighborhood hero. So, how does Miles handle the pressure of being New York's only Spider-Man for the holidays? Well, let's find out and recap the bosses. Similar to Marvel's Spider-Man, the boss fights in Miles Morales play out with most encounters being Miles taking on a single foe in a medium-sized arena-like space, where some bosses will be assisted by henchmen as a distraction, or more so an annoyance to the player. Also, like the game's predecessor, no health bars are displayed for any boss. Once again, players must perform a certain number of combos / takedowns / sequences of events in order to defeat each boss. The first supervillain to test Miles as the new webhead on the block is Rhino.
Miles, get out of here!
A fitting encounter to kick off the game, seeing that Miles and Rhino have a bit of history from the previous installment. The meeting between the two escalates after Peter and Miles try to help law enforcement escort Rhino to a maximum security prison. Unfortunately, Rhino escapes from his prison convoy, which then leads to Rhino rampaging across the city streets while Peter and Miles try to chase him down. The chase even goes so far as to have Rhino bulldozing through a mall, with Miles having to maneuver Rhino from destroying Christmas decorations and running over pedestrians, including a baby.
Power over life and death. Oh, baby! It excites me. Nice! Gotcha! Thank you! You're welcome!
Alas, J. Jonah Jameson's podcast couldn't be saved in the process. Eventually, the chase ends with Rhino causing an explosive crash to a Roxxon facility, with Peter incapacitated, leaving Miles to fend for himself. While protecting his injured mentor, Miles discovers / unleashes a new power against Rhino, a bioelectric surge of power known as Venom Blast in game, with a specific technique used to stun Rhino dubbed as Venom Punch. Which then allows Miles to follow up with a surge of melee strikes and takedowns. After the defeat of Rhino, the Horned Juggernaut is left in the custody of Roxxon Energy Corporation, which seems to have their own paramilitary force for security armed with advanced weaponry and armor. Moments later, Peter regroups with Miles to tell him that he'll be protecting New York City by himself for a while, since Peter is helping Mary Jane with news coverage on Symkaria, Silver Sable's home country. Miles accepts the task at hand and goes on to prove that he's ready to take on the responsibility of being the one and only Spider-Man. That being said, even though Peter is on the other side of the world in Sableland, Peter is still able to aid Miles thanks to his spider training challenges scattered throughout the city that help improve Miles' combative, traversal, and stealth skills. And once Miles completes all 9 challenges, he's left with one final test, fighting a hologram of Peter's first supervillain, Vulture. Now, if you played the first game, you'll have no issue taking Vulture down, seeing that he has the exact same moveset as he did when Peter fought both Vulture and Electro by the Oscorp power plant.
It was a tough fight, but he was weakening. Then, just as I thought I might actually win...
That's right, Miles isn't just fighting one Vulture, but 2 Vultures, with the added commentary of Peter trying to do his best Vulture impression during the fight.
Hey, Vulture number 2, when should you buy a bird? When it's going cheap. Ah!
I've been waiting for the bird jokes to come out.
Swinging back into the main story as Miles gets tangled up in the conflict between Roxxon and the Underground, he soon discovers that Roxxon is a corrupt organization behind the scenes, and that his childhood best friend / possible crush, Finn Mason, is the Tinkerer, leader of the Underground gang. Fast forward a couple chapters, Miles tries to reconcile with Finn about seeking revenge on Roxxon for the death of her brother, but Roxxon kidnaps them both with the aid of an enhanced red armored rhino. Eventually, Miles and Finn are able to escape from Roxxon's custody. Along the way, Miles learns that his uncle Aaron, aka the Prowler, is working for Roxxon and comes across data that showcases a new form reactor being set to destroy all of Harlem should Finn succeed with her plan. But just before both Miles and Finn are able to secure evidence on Roxxon for how dangerous new form energy really is, the duo must face off against the Roxxon armored rhino.
You like my new color? Immune to your little zappy pops.
Zappy Pops? Come on, man.
Instead of being handed over to the authorities, Roxxon recruits Rhino as extra muscle for the company and is equipped with new high-tech crimson armor made to withstand Miles' Venom Blast attacks. In-game, you have to break down Rhino's Roxxon armor by making him crash into sturdy objects and throw various pieces of new form powered tank debris charged with Miles' Venom Blast, until you're able to regularly use Miles' bioelectric powers freely on Rhino like in the first fight.
Roxxon armor's disabled. You're up.
On it.
Also, this time around, Rhino is backed up by Roxxon's security force, which are a pain in the web shooters to deal with when trying to subdue Rhino again. In the aftermath, Finn almost kills Rhino after he mocks her family, but Miles intervenes. Still fueled by hatred and revenge, Finn incapacitates Miles and leaves him behind in order to move forward with her plan to set off the new form reactor.
Finn! Finn, the reactor!
Come near me again. I'll kill you.
On his way to stop her, Miles is unexpectedly captured by his uncle Aaron, who's guilty about helping Roxxon in abducting Miles and Finn, and wants to protect Miles by imprisoning him so that he doesn't end up dead like his father. But Miles isn't having any of it, as he's able to break free from his cell and fights for his freedom against his own blood, his uncle, the Prowler.
You underestimated me.
Unlike his wall-crawling nephew, the Prowler doesn't have any superhuman abilities and relies heavily on his high-tech suit in combat. The Prowler also uses various gadgets when fighting Miles, including the ability to cloak, use wrist cannons, grenades, generate an energy shield, and even project lethal holograms of himself.
Holograms? More tech from your buddies at Roxxon?
Certainly a tricky adversary to deal with due to the Prowler's multiple forms of engagement, but as long as you dodge and counter at the right moments, the Prowler will be viewed as nothing more than a high-level henchman.
Doesn't have to be like this. You, me, hating each other? That's how it happened between me and your dad. I don't want to repeat that.
I don't either. But I can't be the person you want to turn me into. I can't turn my back when people need me. I have to be better than that.
Forging her way to the top as the final boss of the game is the Tinkerer.
I can't let you do this.
I can't let you stop me.
After putting Prowler in his place, Miles continues on to stop the Underground and Roxxon fight on the streets, as well as disrupts Finn's plan to set off the new form reactor from going critical, potentially leveling all of Harlem. In-game, the Tinkerer in Miles Morales is probably the most combative / uniquely designed version of the character to date. With the use of her programmable matter, the Tinkerer is not only granted superhuman strength, speed, durability, and flight, but also has the ability to generate various offensive and defensive tools to combat Miles, including swords, shields, guns, traps, turrets, and even unleash giant Beyblades.
Death wheels! Okay!
This is without a doubt the longest boss fight in the game, as this fight contains 4 phases. But it was a fun experience to face off against this version of the Tinkerer. Hopefully this paves the way for more adaptations of this type of the Tinkerer in future Spider-Man content. By my count, there were a total of 5 bosses in Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, 4 bosses in the main story, and 1 boss during the final Spider Training Challenge. Every boss was defeated on Spectacular difficulty, which is the second hardest mode in the game, and is based on my first initial playthrough on PS4. Cause, I don't got money like that for that PS5 at the moment. Honestly, if you have experience with Insomniac's previous Spider-Man game, or are well versed in free-flow combat, you'll likely only die a couple times due to overwhelming odds, or being unfamiliar with certain attack patterns. Similar to Insomniac's first Spider-Man game, the gameplay never ceases to lose my interest with the game's clever, cinematic, and flashy presentation of how Miles fights and moves as Spider-Man. The boss lineup was decent for a standalone expansion. I didn't expect to fight Rhino twice, but I'm glad Insomniac decided to have Rhino team up with Roxxon because that red armor he was rocking looked pretty badass. Also, being able to fight the 2 Vulture holograms was a nice surprise, and the creative liberties Insomniac took with the Tinkerer exceeded my expectations. So when it comes to the game's placement on the boss tier scale, I'm placing Miles Morales in the B tier. When looking at our boss token awards, the Soulsborne award for the hardest boss fight goes to Roxxon Rhino, simply due to the relentless pressure Rhino brings with his newfound abilities supplied by Roxxon. Also, having to fight and evade Roxxon's security force at the same time didn't make the situation any easier. And f those rocket troopers. The Great Mighty Pooh award for the worst boss fight goes to the Vulture holograms. Honestly, it was a nice surprise to fight 2 Vultures during the final Spider Training Challenge, but seeing that both Vultures' moveset brought nothing new to the table, it wasn't as fun as the fight could have been. Although Peter's voice acting as the Vulture was a nice touch, the Bowser Jr. award for the easiest boss fight goes to the first encounter with Rhino. This fight was pretty much set up as a tutorial on how to use Miles' Venom Punch, nothing more. But I'm glad Miles was able to hold his own against Rhino this time around, because man, that stealth section with Miles trying to avoid the giant Horde Man in the first game was not a fun one to say the least. The Golden Pickaxe award for the most creative boss fight goes to the Tinkerer. Like I said before, Insomniac's version of the Tinkerer exceeded my expectations as a villain in this game. Sure, her use of programmable matter is basically a rip on Iron Man's Mark 50 armor from Infinity War, but it was still fun to witness the different type of weapons the Tinkerer would conjure up next as the fight progressed further on. The Ultimate Showdown award for the best boss fight goes to the Prowler. A fight amongst family always brings another level of dramatic tension. Ever since the announcement of Spider-Man Miles Morales, I've been anticipating that the Prowler would be a boss in the game. Thankfully, Insomniac delivered on that expectation, showcasing what the Prowler is truly capable of. By no means was the Prowler a challenging boss fight, but with the way the fight was set up narratively and the various ways he combated Miles, this made the fight all the more exciting / compelling to play through. So I'm suggesting in the comments down below about the bosses in Spider-Man Miles Morales. Were you satisfied with the boss lineup, or do you wish Insomniac added in a few more villains for Miles to beat up on? Also, let me know what game you'd like to see me cover next. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button, it really helps me out. Subscribe for more content from me on the Boss Recap. I'm DMLX. I'll see you in the future.